Hey, it's Angelina, and today we're going to be taking a look back on Taylor's past 10 albums and look back at their theming and their aesthetic through each era. And in part 2, I'm going to be telling you the 10 aesthetics I think Taylor should try in the future. I just want to say beforehand, this is not me saying that she did something wrong or that I don't like her because she did this or didn't stick to this thing or she should have done this. This is just me giving my opinions on what she did. It's my opinion. You can have a different one. You can think every era was perfectly themed and it stuck to it. I don't care. It's fine. We don't need to fight about it. I just genuinely find different aesthetics really interesting, and I find album artwork and how Taylor styles her hair is super interesting, so I decided to merge the two and do a video about aesthetics, talk about different aesthetics I think it would be cool for her to try based on things she's done before in the past, her clothing styles, and even past photo shoots that she's done. Before the new aesthetics that I think would be cool for her to try, we should start by talking about her past aesthetics and themings, or should I say more specifically her color theming, because most of her past eras she has now decided to revolve around each color, a different color. And each album is associated with a different color, and that's kind of been her thing for the past couple of years. I am not saying that nobody else does this and this is Taylor's thing and no one else has ever had their albums themed to a different color. I know people have. I'm just saying right now, in this day and age, in this time period, right now, this day, Taylor is who is most known for doing that, and I just find that interesting, especially with the eras tour going on right now. She is kind of seen as the main person who does the color theming for her albums, but I don't always think the color theming was always intentional. I don't think she really knowingly color themed her albums. That's just my opinions. I think it started in Reputation era, and of course she had red, but it didn't become an intentional thing truly until the Rep era. And I personally don't think Taylor is always good at sticking to one aesthetic, which she doesn't have to do. These are her albums. If she wants to change it, if she wanted to come out tomorrow and be like, actually, Lover was my grunge record and the color was actually dark red, she could do that. I don't care. I'm just saying that I think sometimes it kind of has been a little jumbled, and sometimes she does it perfectly, but I just think if you're gonna do this, having very distinct eras and for each album, you should probably stick to a certain aesthetic and theming and coloring for each album, because that helps with marketing and with selling and making each album its own thing. So we're just gonna get into that. If you're not interested in looking back at Taylor's past albums and aesthetics and theming, and you just want to see the 10 aesthetics I think she should try, I will probably have the next video up, the video for that up next week. But I would say that I would stick around and see what I think about her past albums and their aesthetics were, because I think it does play into the aesthetics that I have chosen that I would like her to try. But it's up to you, so let's just get into it. Let's start with her first album, which is Taylor Swift. Also, by the way, I have a whole video about Taylor Swift Taylor's version, and like my predictions and what I want to see from it. So if you want to go see that was a couple videos ago. So first we have her first album, Taylor Swift, also known as her debut album. A lot of people refer to this album as debut. She seems to refer to it as her self-titled album. This era was very cowgirl boots and sundresses. She was a teenager, so like 15, 16, 17, and the color of this album is green. But when I was growing up with this album, I always heavily associated this album with blue. I think the consensus in this fandom for a long time was that her first album was blue, but then when Taylor kind of caught on to the color theming and started making a thing, I would say the first time we had a definite answer on what she considered the albums was the Lover House, and her first album she made it green. So that goes into my other point, that I think that the color theming was actually first done for her albums by her fans. I think we were the ones who kind of started associating her albums with colors, and I think she kind of saw that and caught on to that and was like, oh, that's good marketing, which it is, because now you kind of like, especially if you're in her fandom, if you see one of these colors, you'll automatically associate it with her. So if you go to the store, or if one of her fans goes to the mall and they see like a purple dress, they'll be like, oh, that dress is Speak Now. Or if they see a red dress, even sometimes, or red lipstick, they're like, oh, that's Taylor Swift. I think it was from the start with the fans, but I think she took it into her own hands and officially declared what each album's color was during the Lover era. But it's funny because I still kind of see this album as a little bit of blue, even though now it's definitively is green. I wouldn't be surprised if I didn't mention this in my other video on her first album, but I would not be surprised if she turns this album or makes this album from green into a more turquoise or teal color, but we'll see. Aesthetic of this album, I would describe it as a boho beach cowgirl type album. She was wearing a lot of lacy white dresses. She was not wearing cowboy hats. She did wear cowgirl boots, but I cannot remember one time during this era where she seriously wore a cowboy hat, which makes sense. But she definitely had the boots, and so I think in the photo shoot was like her at the lake, at the river. I think of like almost like puka shells and like stuff when I think of this album. I don't know if she ever wore those, but I see a lot of like beachy type jewelry and stuff mixed with the cowgirl boots. So I think the album aesthetic is pretty consistent through this entire era. She pretty much stuck to it, and I still can't really tell if I really think to me I feel like it had to be some type of more organic thing the first time around, and that this genuinely was just how she was dressing at the time and how she wanted to dress. I don't think she actually went into this album being like, this is going to be beach cowgirl. I think that's just what her style was at the time, because I don't think she was really thinking about eras and like each album being completely different from the last at this time. So I would say overall this album is a solid aesthetic and doesn't really stray away from that too much. Now on to Fearless. If I had to put this album into an aesthetic, I would probably say fairy tale core mixed with royal core, mixed with small town aesthetic. I would say like a fairy tale in a small town almost. I wouldn't say fantasy though, because I feel like most of these songs are based in reality. I maybe call this small town girl fairy tale escapism. Escaping your small town for this dream world where you're a princess type of thing, because obviously you have the song Love Story, and you have the song White Horse in this album. That's kind of a theme throughout the album. This album is one of those that kind of coloring wise kind of goes between two colors. Sometimes it's yellow and sometimes it's gold. I personally would say say it's yellow, and then she can use gold later on for a different album, because I do think gold is something that she could use in a future album, so I would just stick with the yellow. I think the theming going along with the music and photo shoots is pretty good. It obviously is much broader of a concept and less tight focused in her first album, because you have the small town aesthetic mixed with the fairy tale aesthetic. I will say also the tour also I think fit really well, because it was almost like her telling a story, which fits with the fairy tale based in reality theme. Yeah, that was Fearless. On to Speak Now. Speak Now is when I feel like it started to get a little bit haywire with the aesthetics, because this one you still have kind of the fairy tale theme going. Again, I don't think at this time she was really thinking that much about definitive aesthetics for each album, so this one you just kind of got almost the leftovers of this fairy tale aesthetic and more of that royal core going on with songs like Enchanted and Long Live. But I feel like this one was a little bit more storybook themed, her telling a different story in each song. So I would say more specifically short story aesthetic almost, where each song is a little short story in this overall fairy tale book. Because you have your breakup stories, your love stories, and you have your almost like before bedtime childhood stories with like Never Grow Up. And definitely the Taylor's version added to that with songs like Timeless and When Emma Falls in Love and Foolish One. The only song on TV that I would say does not fit this theme at all for me is I Can See You. I feel like I understand why that song was left off, because I feel like it doesn't really fit the storybook theme in the same way. It's a pretty broad song, where I feel like every other song on this album really tells a story beginning, middle, and end for the most part, which is also ironic since that's the one that got a music video, which I kind of think is maybe the reason why the music video didn't hit as much as the other ones. Some other ones did, because I feel like it just really didn't fit the set aesthetic for this album. She mentions stories and letters a lot in this album, and that goes over into the Taylor versions with When Emma Falls in Love and Timeless and Foolish One. So I would say definitively for me now, this is definitely the storybook aesthetic album, and obviously The Story of Us. So overall, although it's a bit jumbled here and there, I do think it fits into a set aesthetic. The coloring for this album is purple, but I will say I do not think that was something that was that prominent in Taylor's mind originally when she was writing this album. I don't think she had purple in her mind necessarily. I do think it had to have been an idea, since they went out of their way to change the red dress to a purple dress. But I don't think she was like, this is the purple album, like she does on other albums with the coloring. Also considering the fact that the deluxe album was her in the red dress, I think that kind of confuses some people or mixed it up for some people, because I've seen people say that they thought this album was purple, but then the deluxe was red. And obviously that was supposed to be an Easter egg most likely, but I think if you're trying to stick to a certain aesthetic and to a certain theme for an album, maybe don't make the Easter eggs for the next thing that prominent, because I feel like that kind of disrupts what the current album is supposed to be. So I think overall the aesthetic for this album does fit every aspect of the album except for little bits here and there. Now on to Red. Red was simple. This was the first time she ever did completely intentional color theming, because obviously the album was red, so this one probably was fairly easy for her. Aesthetic wise, other than the color red, the theming was like very 2012 hipster boho type theming. If you look at the photo shoot, it's a lot of boho looks with lacy patterns, very 2012 Instagram, all very purposely done. Did it fit the songs on the album? I would say like 80% it did. After this album came out, it kind of took a personality of its own and became known as the Autumn album in her fandom, just because of the lyrics talking about falling leaves and the secret messages with maple lattes and the color being red, which is a very prominent color during the autumn season. This was the first time I feel like she really had seasons associated with her albums, but I do not feel like this was intentional on her part. She's even said as much in her NPR Little Des concert. She says something along the lines of the fans kind of took it and made it into the Autumn album. And then on the Taylor's version, Taylor kind of took this and ran with it. And read Taylor's version was pretty much completely autumn themed. You didn't really see a lot anymore of that boho look from her, probably also because it's just out of style now. But yeah, the Taylor version was completely autumn themed. Yeah, overall I think this one kind of had an aesthetic that almost came in a color theming that came with the album, almost like it made it itself and formed around itself. I think the red is really good. She stuck to it. This is when the red lips became super prominent. Next is 1989. So 1989 is when it really gets fumbled. When this album first came out, it did not have a solid color associated with it. I don't care what anyone says. I did not see any distinct color theming when this album came out. Obviously the cover was like a tan beige color, and that's what I associated this album with and what I saw it as, especially because also the Polaroids that she put in the album, majority of them had this like sepia almost coloring over it. So I always saw this album as her tan beige album until she said differently. The main theming and aesthetic for this album was the Polaroids, not the color of it, like it was on her last album where you had red. This one, where the last album's thing was the color red, this one was Polaroids and New York skyscrapers. And obviously it fit. After the album came out, then the tour started, the aesthetic kind of changed a little bit, turned into a neon light type of theming for the tour, which I guess also plays more into the 80s theming that a lot of people thought would be on this album. But she still kept that New York in the tour and just added the neon lights aspect into it, and it still fit New York. Then she came out with the Taylor's versions just last year, and it was beach themed. It was seaside themed, no sign of New York skyscrapers, and barely reminiscent of any Polaroids. And yes, I know that they have beaches in New York, but there was no beach theme to be found in the original Taylor, the original 1989, other than her shirt and a couple more seagulls here and there. There was none to be found in the marketing for this album originally. She had a couple of pictures of her like on a ferry in the middle of the water, like in New York. To me, you are not looking at the original 1989 album and thinking this girl is about to go hang out on the beach with her friends. You are thinking this girl is about to go walk around New York City and go window shopping with her friends and maybe take a stroll through Central Park if she has time. But she probably won't because she's a busy New York girl now and she's constantly on the move. And so now also on Taylor's version, much to our surprise, obviously this was kind of set in the Lover era with the Lover house. But now this album the color is sky blue, and I think this is when her first album switched from being blue, because I do genuinely believe that her first album was blue. She was wearing a lot of blue at her first era, although I don't think it was necessarily something that she thought about that much. I do think of it as just a non-conscious thing based on the photo shoot of the first album. So to me, I do think the first album was supposed to be blue, and then I think she decided she wanted 1989 to be blue, so she changed her first album to be green. But that didn't happen until 2019, years after 1989 already had been out. So now Taylor's version and the album is sky blue colored. Even though New York is known for its polluted air and skyscrapers that seem like they are covering up half the sky, and the album starts with Welcome to New York and was marketed as an album about a girl moving to New York City, it's blue. I'm just saying, like, have you ever watched Friends, Seinfeld, Gossip Girl, Sex and the City, Girls, and thought, yes, the beach. They're going to the beach. So although this is a very pivotal album in my life and I love it, the theme is so jumbled and fumbled, and it kind of just ruins the entire feeling of the album because I don't really know where I'm supposed to be when I'm listening to it. Specifically because other than This Love and Maybe Clean, I do not get a beach theme at all from these songs on this album. I honestly get more forest themes from songs like I Know Places and Out of the Woods and Wonderland than I do beach on any of the songs. I honestly feel like Snooki listening to Taylor's versions of this album, wondering where the beach plays into this. So that's my thoughts on 1989. Maybe someone will have a rebuttal on how it is a beach album, but those are just my thoughts. Going from being there when the album first came out and seeing with my own two eyes the announcement, how it was announced, how it was marketed, and then the complete 180 when Taylor's version came out. Next we have Reputation, which I see a stark difference between Reputation and 1989, because to me Reputation is perfect theming, perfect execution. The color is black and it makes sense. Its art theming is newspaper, which is cool, and I hope she sticks with that for the TV, but I don't think she will, because now it kind of seems like she's trying to make Reputation green, which is why I think that Debut might end up being turquoise or teal. She's been wearing a lot of green lately, and obviously that could be her tricking us with all the green she's been wearing lately, and it actually is for her first album, and Reputation will be black still. I don't know though, because as we just saw, she loves to go back and change things on the Taylor's versions. I do think playing into the snake thing more though might work, because she didn't play into it or use it as much in the original Reputation as I thought she was going to. Obviously it was like in the Look What You Made Me Do video and the tour, Karen the snake, but she doesn't mention us being a snake in any songs. And yeah, so maybe that will be a bigger deal in the Taylor's versions. So overall, I think aesthetically this album and the marketing and the track listing are the most cohesive out of all the albums that we've talked about so far. Obviously you have your odd ones out on the track listing here and there, but unless you're making a complete concept album, it is kind of hard sometimes to fit your songs and sometimes even the sound of the songs into a certain aesthetic or theme. And for the most part, the sounds of the songs do fit perfectly into the theming. Reputation, aesthetically, theming, coloring, 10 out of 10. Next we have Lover, and Lover is another one that overall I would say was great theming and aesthetic based on what she wanted the album to achieve, and I think she wanted it to be the polar opposite of Reputation, and that is exactly what she did. The color is overall pink, and I would say specifically pastel pink with some blue in there as well. She kind of did pink and blue, but overall this is her pink album. Now with her pink pastel album, and I do think if she wants to keep on with this color theming, she will start having to go into specifics, which we will see she kind of has already started doing. So say this album is her pastel pink album, and in the future if she wants to make like a hot pink album, she can, or a magenta album or whatever. This album is Pink Butterflies, Rainbows, and Love. There's honestly not much to say. The theming is executed exactly how I think she wanted it to be, and it was consistent throughout the entire short-lived era, down to the clothes she wore on and off stage and how she did her hair with the pink ends. This album is one of the albums that kind of did have a loose concept to it about being about different types of love. I think for the most part it's pretty well executed. I do kind of think that might have been a theming that she thought of after the album was done, or at least halfway through, because she does say at first this album was going to be called Daylight and then she changed it to Lover. So I think she always had the theming for the album that she wanted, but I don't think she necessarily had the concept, and I think that she came up with the concept halfway through writing the album, which I think it's why some songs like The Man don't necessarily fit the theming, that one more so in particular, which I think that song emphasizes my only problem with the theming and marketing of this album, which is the political side of it. She kind of labeled this album her political album, which didn't make sense because it was her album about different types of love, but it was also her political album. I don't really feel like, this might be coming from my personal experience living in America, but I don't think love and politics necessarily go hand in hand. I just think it did not fit. I think it felt really shoehorned in to the aesthetic and the theming, which you might be thinking, well, it's hard to fit politics into an album aesthetic or speaking out against things into an album aesthetic, but I feel like I could maybe argue that point, and that will come up in one of the aesthetics that I chose as an aesthetic I would think it'd be cool for her to try. I think one of the reasons why people kind of felt like the political side of this album rollout was so forced and inauthentic is because it didn't fit the theme of the album at all. It almost made no sense, almost like it was an afterthought, which I think it was. And making it seem like politics and your political views are an afterthought to you is not the move, especially when you're trying to label yourself an activist of some sort. But overall, other than that, one thing I think this album aesthetic is achieved very well. I just think the political thing didn't need to be shoehorned into the era. I do get the LGBTQ allyship angle that she took, especially with songs like You Need to Calm Down, but I think trying to make this whole thing an era about love and politics, especially because to me, some things that she laid as she said were political in this album, I don't think they should be political topics. But yeah, that's a whole different conversation. So let's just get on to the next thing. Next album is Folklore. I found Folklore very interesting because obviously it was her pandemic album, and this album was crafted together in 3 or 4 months. This is when Taylor started to intentionally bringing seasons into her albums. She labeled Folklore as a summer-spring album, and the color for it seems to be gray. Now, part of me understands why she made this album gray. It was 2020. It wasn't the happiest or funnest summer, and most of the songs on this album are sad for the most part. But to me, it was also summer, and a lot of people were spending time outside that summer. And it seems like that included Taylor. Although I think the photo shoot itself matches the summer-spring theme for the most part, I don't know if the gray does. Part of me thinks that she didn't think that much about it color-wise. She just wanted gray to represent the sadness over summer, but she didn't go into it thinking this album is the gray album, like how I think she went into Rep as the black album, or Lover as the pink album, or Red as the red album. This album does have a lot of summer scenery, but I see it honestly more as an end of summer, beginning of autumn album more than a spring album at all. I actually think Evermore has a lot more spring themes on it than Folklore does. Because just looking at the songs and the lyrics that are references to summer, August is about the end of August and August slipping away, and Betty is seemingly about them going back to school, because it literally starts with them talking about going into homeroom, Betty having changed her homeroom, which if they are in high school, usually you, in most places in where I'm from and in America, you will get a homeroom in your first year, and that is your homeroom throughout your entire high school years. So it's kind of implied that she walked into high school for the first time that year and he wasn't in her homeroom anymore. So it's pretty much saying like it's the end of summer and they're starting the school year, so it's going into fall. 7 also feels more like a look back at a summer than being in that summer, though I do still listen to these songs during the summer and see them as summer songs. I think subject wise it is looking more back at summer, and that's why I kind of don't see where the spring fits into this album. It makes me feel like her saying that this album represents summer and spring was kind of an afterthought, and she saw how many times like summer was referenced and was like, oh, that's a thing, and she looked at the photo shoot and was like, I'm coming out with it in summer, it's a summer album. This album was deemed as her foray into cottagecore, which was super popular in 2020 because of people not being able to do anything but go outside. And I do think it has a lot of those elements, but I also think that a lot of cottagecore elements that are missing also. If you look at the photo shoot or even lyrics, I don't feel like I listen to a majority of these songs and really fully get immersed in cottagecore, just subject wise of the album. I think this album definitely did what Taylor wanted it to do. It very much is an album that's kind of for you to put your own thoughts and feelings into it, if that makes sense. It's kind of a choose your own adventure aesthetic type thing, where I think it's more so up to the listener to determine what this album invokes in them feelings and theme wise. So now after Folklore we get into Evermore. Evermore was labeled immediately as Folklore's sister album, and this album was said to represent autumn and winter, and I think she does a much better job at showing that in this album, and she just does a better seasonal theme in this album than in Folklore, in capturing one specific season or two specific seasons. It's probably because it was more intentional, because she had already thought of the idea beforehand, because she had done it with Folklore. The aesthetic for this one is pretty much the same as Folklore, except just in the autumn winter time, and this one is either brown or burnt orange. That is kind of a debate still. We don't know exactly. She kind of changes it up and stuff. I personally think it's brown, and that she should again save the orange for a future project. Color is brought into this one way more, and I do feel like this album is a little bit more hopeful than Folklore, which I find interesting because I feel like usually autumn and winter, those cold months, are so I would say overall aesthetically Evermore is pretty good and consistent. Next we have Midnights. Midnights to me personally is very aesthetically messy. I don't feel like the photo shoot matches the songs or even what Taylor sees as the aesthetic of it 1 year later. The color of this album is dark blue or dark shimmery blue, which is the start of her using different shades of the same color. So 1989 is a sky blue and Midnights is a dark blue. If you look at the album photo shoot though, it does not really give a dark blue aesthetic to me personally. I honestly more get orange from it. The photo shoot is very 70s, like house girlfriend, is that a thing? vibes. And I don't feel like the songs on the album give that. It also was a very somber photo shoot, which I think the Midnight songs are kind of sad, but I don't feel like, so I would say more so the photo shoot doesn't match the sound of the album, I guess. When I first saw the photo shoot for this album, I thought we were getting a 70s inspired record. With the clothes in the photo shoot, the way her hair is done, the room she's in is very 70s with the wood panel walls. So I genuinely think for the photo shoot for this album does not match the album. There are some things in this album I think do somewhat remind me, could be reminiscent of the 70s. Overall, I would say the photo shoot does not match. It honestly seems like she did this photo shoot, and then she wrote and recorded Midnights and didn't have time to do a photo shoot for Midnights. So she was just like, I'll just use this 70s inspired photo shoot that I did, which is super upsetting to me because I've always wanted her to do a 70s inspired album rollout and album in general. So it sucks because I kind of feel like that aesthetic is now wasted, which is kind of probably inspiration as to why I'm doing this video. Because I just like consistency and I like things, if you're gonna do something, go all out with it. And then seeing the music videos for this era, it kind of seems like she was split between two aesthetics for this era, and she didn't know which one she wanted to go for, because the Anti-Hero and the Lavender Haze video are both very 70s inspired videos. But then you have Bejeweled and Karma that are very glamorous, sparkling glitter, fashionable, night on the town, that dark shimmering blue color. I know the music video releases went Anti-Hero, Bejeweled, and then Lavender Haze and Karma. It almost seems to me that when she was writing and recording this album, it seems like she filmed the Anti-Hero and the Lavender Haze video first, with the intention of it being 70s theme, but then she filmed the Bejeweled music video and decided that's what she actually wanted the theme of it to be. But it was too late to reshoot another photo shoot for the album, so she decided to go with what she had. Especially now, because I feel like if you look at the Midnights tour visuals, it is all kind of Bejeweled theme with the Midnight Rain kind of leotard outfit with the garter. It's very Bejeweled theme, and you don't really get any of that 70s from it, that 70s theme from it. It almost seems like she changed the coloring and aesthetic for this album halfway through the album rollout. It seems like it started out as a burnt orange album, and then halfway through the rollout, like immediately after the album was released, the color changed to dark blue. So that's kind of confusing, but I feel like what it is now, the blue stars and moon aesthetic, Bejeweled aesthetic, fits the album so much better, which is weird because obviously the first night that we saw her, she was very Bejeweled Midnights with the stars and moon romper that she was wearing. But then the photo shoot and the Midnight's Mayhem was very 70s orange mahogany type thing. But then the Bejeweled video came out and it changed back to that midnight blue color. But I think the midnight blue color makes so much more sense. So I'm not mad at the changing because I think it does fit so much better. But I do think it can kind of get confusing, especially later on, a couple years down the road when people are reminiscing on this album. It's going to make it kind of confusing of like, what was the aesthetic for this album? Like, you know, it's going to be like right now we're like, oh, she's doing this, but a couple years looking back, we're going to look at the freaking Anti-Hero and the Midnight's Mayhem, and that's going to be one color theming and aesthetic, but then there's this whole other one. It's going to be like, what was the aesthetic, what was the theme, what was the color palette for that album? And I feel like it won't really be a set one. Like, it's not going to be as simple as like Red or Lover because she had these two different color and theming aesthetics for this album. It can make marketing really hard when you don't have that set in stone aesthetic for a era, especially for Taylor, who right now the different eras, and each of them having their own thing is such a big thing right now for her, which is why I decided to come up with 10 aesthetics that I think Taylor should do, that I think she could pull off for future records, that she could actually stick to throughout the entire era. I think I'm gonna tell you the aesthetic, why I think she should do it, tell you what kind of music I think would fit that with it, and I'm gonna give you some Taylor songs that I already think exist that I think fit those aesthetics, and would fit in the era. And I'm gonna tell you if I think there's ever actually a chance that she would actually ever even do the set aesthetics. But that will be the next video, because this has already gone on long enough, and I hope you guys enjoyed taking this look back at Taylor's past aesthetics. Again, I just want to say I am not criticizing her, acting like she did something wrong for not sticking with a theme or a color, that I don't like these eras because I don't like this. It's just me giving an opinion on her past aesthetics. It's not that serious. Subscribe and stick around for the next video, and I will see you guys later.